Hello, my name is Karen French and I'm a real estate lawyer in the Leeds office of Squire Patton Boggs. We're a global law firm and there's a little bit more information about us in the Expo section on the left-hand side of your screen. I'm delighted to be chairing today's session on using innovation to drive sustainability in manufacturing. We've got a cracking panel to talk through the issues in this field today. I'd like to introduce them now. So please welcome Sue Cook, the Chief Executive of 3M Buckley Innovation Centre, Christo Panza, Professor in Strategy and Innovation at Leeds University Business School, Stephen Shaw, Global Engineering Director at AES Seal, and John Koo, the Head of Sustainability at Interface Flooring. Welcome. Before we head into our discussion, I'd like each of our panellists to give a brief introduction of themselves. And Sue, could I go to you first?
Thank you, Karen. Hello, everybody. My name is Sue Cook. I'm the Chief Exec at the 3M Buckley Innovation Centre, or 3M BIC, as we call ourselves. So we're an innovation centre that is part of the University of Huddersfield. And we have also lots of tenants based in our building. So we're a managed workspace, but we do have some very special capabilities related to innovation, prototyping, technology, and so on. And I'll cover some of that later on in the session when it's appropriate. So good to meet you all.
Christo, could you introduce yourself, please?
Hello, everyone, and thanks for having me. It's great pleasure to be here with you virtually. So I'm Professor of Strategic Management and Innovation at the Leeds University Business School. So some of you might ask, how come that a business school is interested in innovation? Because innovation is partly just about technology and science. But we at the business schools are really interested in how companies organize to be more innovative. My research is especially focused on so-called discontinuous innovation. And if somebody asks the question what this is a situation where the companies face when there's some technological development or social development, such as, for example, sustainability, where your core expertise is somehow challenged, or you cannot really rely on your core expertise or core abilities. Historical example is probably Kodak, which probably you all know. If you are producing film and analog camera and digitalization happened, using chemistry you have is pretty much obsolete. And so I think that I'm looking at this type of innovation challenges, and I'm looking forward to discuss this in relation to sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you, Christo, and I'm glad you gave that explanation rather than deferring to me. Great explanation. Thank you. Stephen, can I just go to you for a quick introduction, please?
Certainly. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephen Shaw. Amongst other things, I'm responsible for the engineering at my company, AES Seal. AES Seal operates in the rotating equipment sector mainly, which is pumps, compressors, and that type of equipment. And we manufacture and sell around the world environmental technology to seal pumps, to prevent emissions, to save energy. We do things like clever remote collection of data and use that data. And we like to think that we're an innovative company because we file many patents every year, and we've got to bring those patents and those products to market and sell them around the world. So I'd like to, maybe talk about that a little bit later on, and probably from a practical point of view, back up some of the things that Christo is talking about. obsolescence of products and all that type of thing that we've got to take into consideration when we bring new products to market.
Thanks very much, Stephen. That's great. And yes, you'll be able to have the opportunity a little later to expand on perhaps what the impact and what some of those products are. And lastly, John, over to you. Thank you.
Afternoon, everybody. I'm John. I head up sustainability at Interface for our European and Asian business. We're a leading manufacturer of flooring. Our sustainability mission goes back around 27 years, and it's a real driving force for us. We currently offer products that are carbon neutral, and we're working towards finding a way to be a carbon negative enterprise by 2040. And I guess going into the discussion, you know, we make something that is not at the cutting edge of technology. When you think of flooring, normally people walk on it. When we talk about discontinuous innovation, I'm not planning on putting our product on walls or walking upside down or flying or being magic. But jokes aside, you know, we've had to change how we focus and where we can innovate. How can we respond to a climate emergency? What is it that we're going to be making in the future? And another angle on that is, for us, we sell into workplaces. What is a workplace going to look like in a green recovery post-pandemic world? But looking forward to the discussion.
That's great. And I'll stick with you, if you don't mind, for the first theme of our questioning, which is going to focus on sustainability issues, which of course is at the heart of today's conference. And I think quite a few of our listeners will have checked into other sessions this morning. And what I think will be particularly fascinating and interesting about this particular session is that we're going to the heart of manufacturers, hearing their story and how the companies here are experiencing, implementing, and the challenges that you're facing with regards to sustainable manufacturing. So, John, in the first instance, if you wouldn't mind kicking us off with how your company, how Interface has put carbon at the centre of your decision making, and how that has perhaps had an impact on the products that you make and the processes that you adapt.
Absolutely. Thank you, Karen. So for Interface, our sustainability journey started back in 1994. Our late founder, Ray Anderson, started to get a question from our customers. They were asking, what are you doing about the environment? To be honest, the question we receive now in 2020 is, what are you doing about the climate? Or what are you doing about carbon? What are you doing about net zero? Now, for Ray, rather than ignore the question or turn to someone else, he took a personal interest. And the more he talked to the science community and the business community and NGOs, the more he realized that carpet tile, which is what we were famous for, was a dirty business. The petrochemicals based, which is super high carbonally intensive from coming from fossil fuels. Our manufacturing plants were spewing out huge amounts of carbon. And then in terms of end of life and in the use phases, through kind of carbon emissions for those elements, you know, it was all adding to putting too much carbon into the atmosphere like any other manufacturer. So what he thought about then was, well, what can we do about it? In our sphere of influence, what's a change that we can make? And for Ray, that was setting us on our first sustainability mission to find a way to do less bad. So how could we reduce those carbon emissions? And carbon was very much at the center of it, because when we looked at our life cycle assessment for our product, as any good manufacturer should do, it was the carbon footprints at a supply chain, a manufacturing, a transport, a use and end of life phase that really sprung out to him. So we've been on a 27-year mission to reduce the carbon footprint of our products. And to date, we've been able to do that by around 75% for the carpet tile. And I think for us, it's been a really interesting kind of journey to see the world get more carbon savvy in recent years. Now, in terms of milestones, having reduced the carbon footprint of our carpet tiles by 75%, we were actually able to make all of our carpet flooring products carbon neutral as of 2018 by offsetting that remainder. And what we wanted to do there is to challenge the market and say, if it's possible as a manufacturer to make a product that's carbon neutral, why wouldn't you? If you're working in government procurement for a school or an office, or if you're working in the private sector for a new building for a financial institution or any kind of company, why shouldn't your specification be to try to get a low carbon or a carbon neutral option? So another aspect for us in terms of carbon has been looking at what we can do in our own facilities and our own products, but also starting that dialogue with our customer base to say, how can, if we're going to get to net zero by 2050 or sooner, how do we have to change some behaviors to make that happen? And I guess as a final point for us, our first couple of years on carbon was all about doing less bad. How can we reduce the footprint in the materials? Now it's about, in our sphere of influence, can we provoke a conversation around embodied carbon? Can we empower our customers to realize they can make smart carbon decisions? And it's becoming more of a how can we do more good? So that's a few little opening thoughts on that.
Thanks, John. And really interesting. And, you know, a deeper and longer conversation would be smashing if we could do that another time. If I could turn to you, Christo, because I know that your research actually focuses on how companies organise and respond to major changes, and not in your terms solely limited to sustainable issues. But how do you think the increasing importance of sustainability has impacted upon innovation strategies?
Well, it is. I think that I quite like John's example, although yes, I do usually study large technology-led companies. John said illustrates how these things are very similar. So I think that first he said that they are really looking into the future, like maybe the house of the future is going to look like, or the office of the, especially in relation maybe to sustainability and what they can do. So that's one of the things whenever we talk about innovation strategy in general, have to look future, see what are the trends, whether technological and social trends, and actually see how they can over these what they will call innovation. The other thing that John said, of course, once they started the journey, they started to think whether this create competitive advantage. If I have zero neutral product, does it kind of create competitive advantage? And you can see how in this case, to some extent, sustainability draw their innovation as well in the context of the competitive world they live. And in terms of going back to the innovation strategy, the company is increasingly looking at sustainability as a growth area, as something that is not something that, well, okay, they just have to do because there is a compliance element, but also they see this as a growth area. And if you see this as then of course the question is, are you going to allocate the resources on this? How much resources are you going to allocate on this? Is this something that is very close to your core business, or it maybe requires you to diversify a little bit, looking maybe at other customers, at other industrial sectors, because these sectors will probably grow more than some others. And I think that also there's certainly important consideration. What is this innovation opportunity? Is sustainability a big innovation opportunity? And then questions about, is this require us to looking at the new markets, at the new customers? And of course, the question, do we have internal capabilities to do this? So if you have internal capability, then just leveraging them in the new market might be less of a challenge. If you don't have them, if the company do not have them and have to develop them or have to partner with somebody else, then of course it's organizationally a little bit more challenging. The main point is that a lot of companies that might not necessarily be directly related to the typical sustainability sector, they see sustainability as a growth area where the from, and they try to explore this opportunity in new areas. But that said, again, this is what in experience and from academic research, that entering cannot really align or discontinuous with your existing capability is challenging. People are not necessarily very good in is outside their comfort zone. So I hope that I kind of explain how sustainability can drive innovation more strategically.
Yeah. Yeah, that's brilliant. And that's really helpful to give a backdrop to some of the issues that our other panelists will be explaining. And if Stephen, I could just turn to you now. And I do know that AES Seal clearly has got a commitment to protecting the environment. It goes to the heart of your business. And as one of your corporate values, it's so important. But how much of a challenge has that been for the company? And, what are some of the hurdles that you've had to face when implementing this core value?
Yeah, well, Karen, thanks. It's for us, we operate in the area of rotating equipment. And if we take pumps, for example, it's a real good opportunity for us because most pumps are oversized, most pumps are operated pretty badly, and most pumps run pretty inefficiently, so they consume energy. They consume a lot more energy than they need to do, and they're operated and set up in a way which, with some intervention, it can be run a lot more efficiently, save a lot more energy, and prevent leakage. So I'll give you an example. It is quite commonplace in many industries to take a process that maybe runs fairly hot, a couple of 100 degrees C, and to cool the pump and the mechanical seal in the pump by injecting water, cool water into that area, and then evaporating that water out at a later stage. You could imagine how wasteful that would be when they're running pumps 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and wasting millions of pounds through running their pumps in that way, when there are other technologies that can save them that sort of money and save the energy. So it gives us a really good opportunity to go along to the customer and say, look, if you use a different technology, if you invest a little bit of money in changing the way that you run your process, not only is it going to be good for the environment, but it's going to be good for you as well, because you'll get a huge return on investment. But of course, sometimes the difficulty for us is that people operating the equipment are not the people that will make the decisions on upgrading their pumps. So we've got a selling job to do to lots of different areas within a business. We've got to make the business case many times, and we've got to make the case that it's going to help from a sustainability point of view, and we've got to convince the customer it's the right thing to do. But that's what we have to do every day of our lives.
So identifying the connectivity, if you like, between the boardroom and perhaps the decision makers within a company and those people within that company who are the, let's call them the innovators, those that are working and designing the processes and machines and so on, making sure that the right messages go up to the board as well as down from the board. I can see that as a real challenge, and clearly some companies will be much better at that than others?
Some companies are much better at it than others. That's a fact, and I think there is a disconnect in many cases between the people who have the authority to make the decisions and the people operating the equipment. It's just a fact. We see it every day.
And it's clearly too, there can be values, but there's also talent, and it's matching the talent with the values and the research. Thank you. That's really interesting. Sue, if I could turn to you and just refer to Make UK, who found that one of the biggest barriers for the creation of sustainable manufacturing practices is often the upfront investment costs that have to be incurred by those companies, and that they're sort of, as they're at their fledgling state, that might be more difficult for them to get their head round. And maybe you can give us a little bit of an explanation about how 3M BIC's facilities have helped such companies to maybe test prototypes and become more sustainable. If you could tell us a little bit about that, please.
Thanks, Karen. Yes, certainly. And we think it's really important for the university and the 3M BIC in particular to be there for SMEs in particular, who will not, as you say, have access to all the latest equipment. And so there has been significant investment here. There was about £4 million invested a few years ago, jointly with the university and the Leeds City Region LEP, in what we call our Innovation Avenue facilities. So we have quite a range of technologies, from your basic 3D printing, the kind of thing that would have been making PPE kind of components, through to a bigger polymer version, and our pride and joy, which we have two additive manufacturing Renishaw machines, which are, in layman's terms, metal printers. One prints in stainless steel and one in titanium. I'll show you some examples in a minute. But the link from those to the theme of sustainability here is that in order to make the most of these new approaches to manufacturing, it's how you design a product can be completely different from the old way, which is more of a subtractive method. So you take a lump of metal, you drill holes in it, and, you know, obviously simplifying this, and you take your material out. Whereas in the latest approaches use different ways of design, using software like Altair, where you're designing the product for maximum strength and performance, but minimum weight and materials. And so this additive manufacturing approach is really the key to a lot of future products and components, particularly in aerospace and automotive industries, where you can really reduce the number of elements and parts that go into something and take weight out in the process. So I'll show you an example. This is just a little test piece. So you can see the lattice work involved in this being produced on the Renishaw machines, where it's very complicated on the insides, but there's lots of space and air in there. Now, to make that in traditional terms it probably wouldn't really be that easy, or maybe impossible. But to do that with the metal printer, you can, again, in layman's terms, it's like a laser going. It's building up from the bottom up, so you can build the complexity in from the beginning and therefore take weight out. We've got an example here. This is a model of a camping chair part that, made in plastic, would weigh about 30 grams. And so our designer has used this approach to take out excess layers and develop a design that, if made with a lightweighting approach, would go from 30 grams down to 8 grams. And so if millions of parts using that method really does to start build up savings. So this is just a little test piece, but it kind of shows you the kind of approaches that we do here. So we have got a team that is including our designer and technicians, who will help SMEs to apply these technologies. So from the start, with a sketch or a CAD drawing, an idea of how they might improve their existing product or bring forward a new one. And so we can then visualize that with them, what it would look like, and then take it through to prototyping, either in plastic, polymer, or ultimately in the metals, if that is what is needed for their for their context. And so if anybody wants to come and see it, we'll be restarting our guided tours again, probably from July onwards. So people can go on our website, put their name down. If you want to come and see, it's easier to see it in practice, see the kits and meet the team. So I would say if any, particularly SMEs, want to come and have a look, we're here to help people appreciate what can be done in order to apply these technologies.
So, and that's really helpful, and that invite to have a look around is really generous, and I'm going to put my name on that list, because I do know a couple of my colleagues have been already and said it's absolutely fascinating. Stephen, if I could just go back to you, because you've mentioned that AES Seal filed a number of patents every year. You've been on a sustainable roadmap for many a year now, and the company is, a great ambassador company for sustainability. And if you wouldn't mind just sharing with the audience, the company's story about what some of those innovations have been and how they're helping your business and how they are helping some of your clients perhaps meet their sustainability agenda as well.
Yes, certainly. We are constantly developing products and processes, constantly, all the time, and we're filing a number of patents every year, sometimes as many as 20. I think one of the most important things is that there are a lot of great products to develop, but you've got to be able to sell them. You've got to have a use. And one of the things that I like about being in this business is that we've got our own sales force all around the world to sell our products, because you've got to have somewhere to sell them. You've got to have somebody that wants them. It's nobody just having a great product and nobody wants it. So we've been developing products for our customers for many, many years, even though they don't know it. So I'm really interested in, we've got a digital roadmap that drives our development program. And at the heart of that digital roadmap is our customer. And how do we connect with our customer? And how do we develop products that we can show them? How do you show a customer a mechanical seal that's not been made yet? And how do you sell them one? That type of thing. So we got onto the idea of knowledge databases a long, long time ago. And we filled our knowledge databases with, I think currently there's about 75,000 pieces of rotated equipment in our knowledge database. And we work on the premise that a pump in the UK is the same as a pump in France, and it's the same as a pump in the USA. So we gather that knowledge. And we've done things like design automation. And if I go around the world, and I have done, asking customers, how long does it take you to create a general arrangement drawing? Those people will say almost always, on average, about a week. And how long does it take you to model up all the parts? Well, on average, about a week. They don't all take a week, but on average, about a week. So there's 10 days of engineering time. So a few years ago, Siemens dangled in front of us this idea of the digital twin and design automation, and then said, but we can't do it for you, because you've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of part numbers, different parts, and it just can't be done for your business. But we've done it, and we can now design the parts and put them together using a road, basically without human intervention, in about 90 seconds. So we can populate our database now of products. We can populate 75,000 products with 6 or 7 or 8 different types of seals to go into those products, which is about 10 lifetimes for a designer, and we can do them in, months. And our knowledge database grows significantly every single day. It's getting added to, even if we don't get an order, still goes in our knowledge database. We can then connect with the customer and say to the customer, what sort of pump you have and what sort of product are you pumping, and we can give our customer digitally a drawing a price in any language in the world, and if they place an order, we can step whatever we've got manufactured. So that is one of the things that we're working on, which is a digital roadmap, and you know, we're using pieces of software and joining them up, where the people that supply the software say we can't join them up, they don't talk to each other. We've got to find ways for them to talk to each other. So I think innovation is not just about product development, and we do a lot of that, but it's about the processes of connecting with your customer and giving them a great customer experience so that they want to buy from you and they want to work with you.
Thanks, Stephen, because actually that leads me that sort of connectivity leads me into a question for John, really, and focusing on supply chain and in the context of sustainability. You know, I'm wondering what hurdles Interface have experienced in eliminating carbon across your supply chain. I mean, have you got any lessons that you can perhaps share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to go theory against reality to start with. So in theory, government sets out a net zero target. All companies who have offices are like, oh, we better procure with carbon in mind. Let's go and ask our manufacturers to give us a low carbon option. And then as a manufacturer, we have to go into our supply chain and say, okay, to be competitive, how can we innovate with you? Now, unfortunately, that theory isn't the reality, because there's some breaks in that chain. So we find ourselves kind of trying to advocate to our customers saying, these carbon goals are going to come down from government. You need to kind of think ahead. So that's challenge one as us in a supply chain. But then also when we take it to our suppliers, you know, we've been used to 100 years of discussions around price and discussions around functionality. And it takes a kind of a mindset and a dialogue to kind of say there's a benefit for us and for you in taking carbon more seriously as a topic. So, for example, I think carbon for us, like our biggest impact is our carbon footprint, but the focus of our supply chain has been on how can we increase recycled content. And both are kind of linked, but they're not necessarily always drawn out. And we had, like, our biggest impact is in our yarn. And with our yarn suppliers, we had a challenge where they were really pushing on the recycled content, but they weren't thinking about, you know, what was the energy usage and the process that they were using. But I think what helps us there is this key concept of dialogue. Rather than the checkbox saying, have you done this and done this? What we looked at doing is going to our yarn suppliers and saying, you're doing a great job. You've been able to reduce your carbon footprint by X, but do you know what? You could do an even better job if you could reduce the process energy you're using, or if you could embrace more renewable energy, or if you then find ways to innovate. So I guess that's my key point, is that often the challenge is we're in tough economic conditions. People might not have thought about reducing carbon in a certain way, or might have their focus elsewhere. And it's how do you get people to run in the same direction as you? And in terms of how we've been looking to do that, we've been working on bringing our suppliers onto a platform where they can share that journey together. So we can share what we think is important. They can share what they're seeing. And then we can bring in some outside influences to say, these are some macro trends and micro trends in your area, a bit like today and with the In the Circle kind of conference. And that's our grounding to create the dialogue. And then our next plan is, you know, by 2024, I want to be able to have analysed the LCAs of our top 5 to 10 suppliers and start mapping a pathway. But it has to be a journey that we do together. It can't be, can you meet the standard and tick this box? If you say yes, we'll use you. If you say no, we won't. And I think that's where it's getting interesting. Is I think carbon reduction is an innovation topic that we have to work with our suppliers on, and it's going to require a bit of give and take both ways, and a bit of a different way of doing business than it might have been in the past.
find, John, as in your role as head of sustainability interface, that those conversations are happening and are easy to have and people are receptive, or do you feel they're a bit of a battle? Or
much less of a battle than it has been perhaps in the past. I think in the case of larger suppliers, when you go in and you say this is a business opportunity and this is about risk mitigation, very quick to kind of think how they can respond. Here, where the challenge we have with net zero is the SMEs and the smaller suppliers, they need that helping hand, or they need a bit of guidance. You cannot expect a small supplier of a much smaller material to be the same as a BASF or a giant. And I think we are, as sustainability professionals and procurement professionals, have to think about how can we kind of have a helping hand and guide. So that's one of the challenges I think I'm seeing being faced. Now, one of the interesting things about Race to Zero and the work that's been doing for COP is I know there's a real drive to kind of help smaller and mid-sized businesses engage, same at UN Global Compact level. And it's just turning those from being the talks and the policy into toolkits and action, and making it as easy as possible for smaller suppliers to be able to progress and be part of this journey.
That's where, organisations such as 3M are sort of a nice fit with the issues that you've just been identified. If I could just turn to Christo for a minute, and obviously we've been through and we are involved and coping with the COVID pandemic and still are. And so this has presented many manufacturers with issues. Some will have responded much more positively than others, I'm sure. But Christo, can you maybe explain to us how organisations can adapt their innovation strategy when, in this particular context, circumstances change unexpectedly? As you know, for many a company, this has happened literally over the last year.
Well, I think that first of all, when we try to strategically manage organization, we have to be aware that we are living in a very uncertain, we are living in a very ambiguous world, and we are living in a very complex world. And that makes management a much bigger challenge than it would be if we could just optimize everything and we would exactly know if we do A, then we will get B. So I think that this causality in this type of world is much more problematic. First of all, we have to be aware about the world we are living. Now, of course, if I make a little bit of a parallel with COVID. So with COVID, it was very clear that everything was too late. So I hope that in sustainability, we are not going to end up in the same situation, that we will start changing when everything will be too late. So on a higher level, I can certainly say that COVID, partly, it's not just a failure of health planning, it was also a failure of science policy, because we had, some technologies that are maybe not that advanced. So UK is pretty rich country, and not having testing equipment, is pretty disastrous. And I think that those are things that simply you have to prepare. And I think that how you can respond if something happens and it's really drastically different, then if you are not prepared and you don't have some option open, then you would struggle. I mean, if you are entering in some big change totally unprepared, it's going to be very, very, very difficult. And if I give some of the example how this preparedness look like, this is not sustainability example, it's more like example of using digital technology in relation to COVID. And you are probably all familiar now, we are all in newspapers about how students don't like online learning, and they want to have face-to-face learning. But one of the reasons that at least universities were able to react to COVID is because we were experimenting with digital learning even before. Now, we haven't used it, right? We haven't really monetized it. So, for example, I develop a MOOC on innovation management, so that's massive open online course, simply because I was curious and some resources was available. So that was a little bit exploring, playing with some things to see whether this might be useful in the future. Now, of course, I didn't predict that this is going to be as useful because of COVID, but it kicked in and we had to switch online. For example, we had a lot of digital resources already prepared that weren't used before. So, going back to this, preparing for unexpected, it means that you have to look in the future. Let's say if this is sustainability, think about what are the trends within the sustainability that are very impactful. They are maybe very certain. What does it mean? That you know that this is going to happen. And then of course you are going to prepare. But you also have to strategically think, what are those things that we don't really know? What are those things that are uncertain? The things that can go either in one direction or in another direction, or maybe even the third direction. And then as a company, you probably have to invest a little bit into these other options so that you are prepared on the things that are maybe not that obvious. Because if something is obvious, you will definitely prepare for it. But if the things are not obvious, you still want to dedicate some resources to develop these activities, if in the future that would be useful. And of course, this is a challenge of innovation management. And I think that a good example is your example with showing how maybe SMEs can collaborate with universities. So if you know that you need 3D printing, I mean, maybe that's a bit of a bizarre example, then okay, go and buy it. But if you are a little bit uncertain, then actually work with university. Asks you might actually, or some of her colleague or our colleague will write a project and we will get funding from government. Government is very happy to give for small companies like John's to innovate, right? Maybe John doesn't have time to write the project. Going back, so certainly, what are the managerial implications? If you are exploring in the areas that are very uncertain, they might be about sustainability. Don't do it alone. Partner with somebody else. Don't do it just with your money. Try to leverage, try to collaborate, try to get other resources. And, I think that going back to Karen, your question, preparing for this unexpected event required some investment up front and really thinking about where this disruption might come from, and somehow in a very disciplined and staged manner develop these things. And if they are going to be, if the environment changes, maybe these things will become much more crucial than you ever thought and much more core to your business. So I think that that's important to know about this preparing for big changes.
Perfect, Christo. I'm interjecting you, and apologies for that, but we have a closing cut-off guillotine in 1 minute. So I just wanted to say thank you. But your closing words, Christo, actually really did that beautifully in the interlinking of the assistance that organisations such as 3M BIC and the companies Interface and AES Seal have experienced, and the coming together, the sharing the knowledge, that thinking about the future, planning for the unknown is really, really useful and helpful. So without further ado, can I thank all of our panelists for taking part in the conversation. I hope our listeners have found that interesting. I certainly have. And I encourage you to have a look and take part in the networking and the expo and the remainder of the sessions this afternoon. Thank you.